Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Dr. Faraday. I'm a Tudor historian and a historian of diplomacy. But here I would like to give you a sneak peek of my interview with the amazing Dr. Christina Faraday for her book, The Story of Tudor Art. And here it's a glimpse of what you can get if you become members to my channel and support my channel, where I give you interviews with amazing authors and historians. But let's dive into the world of Tudor art with Christina. And so what is your book? What have you discovered? Because as you said, like you talk about different things because it's really about the art. And I think when we thought about the art, I mean, I don't know, like maybe people will disagree with me, but you think about portraits. I mean, that's the first things I think about, but that's not the only thing, is it?
No, and it wasn't even the most important thing for them. Portraits were. I think art in this period is all about communication. So first of all, you have to jettison this notion of art for art's sake. They're not buying it because it's beautiful. They're buying it because it can do something for them. For them, however, the most valuable art form was tapestry. It was the most labor intensive, the most high status. It sometimes included gold and silver thread made of real gold and real silver. So that kind of tapestry was really only afforded by the monarch. But tapestries were seen by large numbers of people because they were often hung outdoors for festivals, hung in the streets for sort of the arrival of the king or in courtyards. Henry VIII actually hung one of his barges with arras, this tapestry that has, gold and silver thread in it. So it really was used as a kind of backdrop to royal encounters, actually.
Yeah.
And what I noticed, so I start with Henry VII and his mother, actually, Lady Margaret Beaufort, got to mention her. So I start with Henry VII because he's often neglected in sort of favour of Henry VIII. Everyone gloms to Henry VIII thinking, oh, Holbein, that's the exciting stuff. But Henry VII is such an interesting patron of art. There's a lot more work to be done on what he was doing. But one of the things I noticed was that he seems to be choosing his tapestries to tell stories about his reign. So he uses a tapestry of Vespasian, who was an emperor who was associated with ending a period of civil war. And so he's like, hey, me and this guy, and that's something that Henry VIII does to an enormous degree. He's got loads of tapestries of King David, who's one of his favourite exemplars. The Abraham tapestry is a very, very expensive set of tapestries that he buys quite late in his reign. Abraham, was a religious leader for his people. He had to wait many years before he achieved a son. All of these things Henry VIII was identifying with. So tapestries seem to be one way that we can see the monarch framing themselves. But I don't just talk about royalty. It's very easy to tell this period story through its big royal names, and I have to structure the book that way because I think they have an undeniable influence on the tone of the art through their religious preferences, through their foreign policy. There are lots of things that do affect the art depending on who the monarch is, but there's also a very interesting new current of art patronage coming from the middle classes, who for the first time ever have disposable income and a desire to show off that they are a distinct group of people. And they do that through portraits and household objects, all kinds of crafted things. So I look at the word art very broadly. Anything that's made partly to be looked at, I think, counts as art in this period. So royalty, but also the middle classes, all the kings, and then also thinking about decorative arts as well as the more expected fine arts like tapestry, which of course are very important for our impression of that period.
I think it's fascinating because when you talk about tapestries, for us, we don't really realize the importance of them. Like, I mean, if you look at every coronation process, but even, in France as well, I know we're talking about the Tudors and stuff, but even in France, they were, every time they were moving and they stopped in a city, there were tapestries.
Yeah. They learn a lot from the French, actually. So yeah, Henry VIII is obsessed with Francis I. He wants to, rival him. And
Yes.
absolutely, tapestries are so important. They're incredibly valuable. And it's so hard for us to understand that now because they are very light sensitive. They've often, been eaten away to nothing by moths, but where they do survive, you don't get an impression of how brilliant and shiny and beautiful and actually easy to read they were.
We don't understand the work of propaganda that these tapestries had for the people compared to the portrait, because portraits couldn't see them all the time. Do you see what I mean? Like, it was...
Yeah. So they have a much broader reach. I mean, I personally try to avoid the word propaganda. It was a word that was used a lot by late 20th century historians who were living through the Cold War. I'm a 21st century historian, so I use the phrase branding.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah. I don't think it has the power to control the populace. There isn't a kind of single authoritarian top-down view. And we see that actually in Elizabeth's portraits, which of course, the main thing is they're aimed at the fellow nobles, the people who can keep her in power. And that's true, I think, the whole way along, when we see Henry VII's reforms to the coinage, the people who are actually going to see and hold those gold coins that he introduces, there are not many of them in the country. So with Elizabeth, and her portraits, that's what Susan Fry's called a competition for representation. So the different courtiers are left to commission their own portraits of Elizabeth with their own choice of attributes and their own messages that they want to convey. Don't necessarily always agree with what Elizabeth wants, particularly the Civ portraits seem to be very much aimed at dissuading her from marrying Francois, the Duke of Anjou, for example. So You're the Virgin Queen is actually not a celebration at that time. It's a kind of reminder, like, don't go marrying this guy, you're our Virgin Queen. And that, that again is not so much an authoritarian, a single perspective has created all of these images. It's actually a really interestingly contested and, even potentially quite controversial set of conflicting ideas. So the miniatures for me are a bit of a conversion story. When I'd sort of been studying them before, I'd always thought they were a bit boring. And then I was an intern on a miniatures exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery for 2 years, and that completely converted me because finally I was seeing them in person. And I think the issue is they don't really translate to the screen or to print. When you see them in person and you get a sense of the magic of texture. So Nicholas Hilliard, the primary miniaturist of Elizabeth's reign, all kinds of things he did to innovate in the painting of miniatures. He used very thick lead white paint to create the lace ruffs. So if you ever, not recommended, were to run your finger over the surface of a miniature, we don't do that, you would be able to feel the raised surface of the ruff. It would be like the lace was there. And he also used real gold and real silver to create jewels. He put dots of silver on all of the pearls in the necklaces to give them a sheen. And he also created gemstones by laying some foil and then getting some coloured resin, so red for rubies or green for emeralds. And with a hot needle, he would apply it to the miniature, pull the needle away, but that would leave a little kind of like a Santa hat, a sort of trail of resin. So then he'd have to hold the miniature up to a candle flame just close enough that it didn't catch fire, but that it melted the resin back down into a kind of ruby shape. So, and he invented those things, and we get
Fabulous.
wonderful. He's a genius actually, but he was a nightmare of a person. It was a real, he was he's such a complainer, and he's so bad with money. So he's always in debt. We know so much about him because he's constantly in debt. He's constantly writing letters of complaint. He attempted to do a kind of gold mining expedition in Scotland that busted. He spent loads of money on that, didn't get any gold. And even his father-in-law, actually, at a time when, let's be clear about this, women were not respected and not expected to, control the finances in any way. His father-in-law made sure that he left his money to his daughter in such a way that Nicholas Hilliard couldn't get his hands on it. He trusted his son-in-law that little. with the money. So yeah, and to be fair, you know, not helped by Elizabeth being very reluctant to pay her bills. So he was in debt partly because, you know, he was waiting for Elizabeth constantly to pay him, and she just kind of didn't for many years. But, you know, complicated people are heroes.
I really hope that you enjoyed that video. If you want to know more, you know what to do. Thank you so much for your support and for watching.